Good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AAFLFC podcast. I am more than delighted today to have as my special guest author Aimie Runyan. I have to admit, I am a fan. I have read Aimie Runyan's first two books, which really have a wonderful setting in Quebec, in La Nouvelle-France. And I understand that Aimie has gone on to write many more books about many more resilient women making the world a better place. I see them there, and I can hardly wait to read them all. But now to get to business, I'm going to read a brief introduction of the author. From my earliest years, I loved jotting down stories and really, really bad poetry. I dabbled in the world of the short story for a long time until I finally sat down one fateful February day and decided that my beloved short story, Days of Plenty, deserved to become a novel. I felt and feel that it was the story the world needed to hear. More importantly, I knew that after 33 years of life, 7 years of marriage, and 2 children, I finally had the life experience to tell it. Thus, Promised to the Crown was born. Okay, and this is a wonderful, wonderful book. And its little sister, Duty to the Crown. And then I've moved forward in time, and we have Mysteries, Daughters of the Night Sky. It was a complete departure from my earlier works, but the stories of long-forgotten female pilots on the Russian front in World War II deserve to be told. Girls on the Line, the story of intrepid women who served as phone operators in World War I, was another story I was thrilled to bring to the page. Ruby remains one of my favorite heroines. In subsequent novels, Across the Winding River and The School for German Brides, forthcoming in 2022, largely delve into the personal nature of war and the people who are forever changed by it. I'm also thrilled to be moving into contemporary fiction in the near future. My upcoming novel, The Tempest over Sainte-Colombe, set in the lush hillsides of Provence, explores the life of Tempest Luddington. Unmoored after the death of her father, she seeks out her purpose in the small village of Sainte-Colombe, where her mother was raised. Along the way, she learned some shocking truths about her mother's past and herself. Delving into the emotionally charged world of women's fiction is a challenge I'm so excited to undertake. I hope to create vibrant characters, lush settings, and heartwarming dramas that will transport the reader to a different place. Consider it virtual vacation fiction. Before transitioning to full-time writing, I taught French to high schoolers with occasional stints into English, public speaking, and competitive forensics. While I'm not writing or wrangling my wayward kiddos, and I know that well, I enjoy hiking, baking, sewing, especially costumes, music, especially live, theater, movies, and all things sacred unto nerd culture. I'm proud to be a member of the Tall Poppy Writers, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, Pikes Peak Writers, and the Women's Fiction Writers Association. And to find out more about the author and all the latest news, it is www.amierunyan.com, and this is from /bio.
Yeah, now, Aimie K. Runyan, middle initial in there.
So sorry, my reading glasses. Anyway, Aimie, please tell us about how you first became interested in French language and Francophone culture.
Well, I was always the kid that, aside from my interest in writing, I was always the kid that found language interesting. And, whenever I saw things on television about travel specials, we watched a lot of PBS growing up, and I'd see anything about France, especially, I was transported. And, the Eiffel Tower was, just kind of this icon of not small town living. Because I came from a very small town in California, and just the lure of travel. My parents weren't and aren't travelers, and I think that's kind of actually part of my inherent nature is I love to travel. And so in third grade, and this is going to be a test the importance of foreign language education, we had a little intro to French class. One of the third grade teachers was very fluent in French. Miss Steele, I remember her fondly, and we had an intro to French class. And I mean, it was un, deux, trois, ABC, very basic things, but you know, it was for probably a month. And it was, I love the way that my third grade did it. And you know, my third grade experience, my daughter's in third grade right now, so I hope she's having the same thing, but it really was kind of a watershed. It was kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a really significant year in that they allowed us to try new things. And I think that each of the teachers, I think the way they must have done it was they had, you know, their own special interest or skill or something, and they got to do a special unit for a month or so on that subject. And Miss Steele chose French, and I was absolutely immersed in it. I loved it. And I also got, one of the things they did that year was they gave us each a blank book that one of the grandmothers in the class had made for each kid, and we had to write a story. And I thought that was extremely powerful too. So it was really a significant year. And so once I had the opportunity, I knew I wanted to study French, and I didn't have the opportunity to study it seriously until high school, as is unfortunately the case in a lot of American schools. I could have taken Spanish in middle school, but I really wanted to take French, so I held off and took French starting my freshman year in high school and threw myself into it. And my French teacher, Monsieur Chapman, was, you know, very dedicated, you know, academic. And even though he didn't have permission to teach an AP level class because the enrollment wasn't quite right, and we had to have a split French 3-4 class and everything, he really strove to make sure that we had really an excellent French education given his limited resources. And we were reading Huis Clos and Jean-Paul Sartre and things in fourth year. Wow. Yeah, and it was no nonsense. Monsieur suffered no fools. And so it was definitely serious, even though we weren't taking the AP exams, unfortunately. And so then I went to Linfield College, or now it's Linfield University. They offer master's degrees now, which is great. But they are, part of the reason I chose them is that they were very, very focused on study abroad, especially for their foreign language majors. And, you know, of course, when you go into college, you end up taking a lot of exams and whatnot to figure out, you know, they're kind of encouraging where you should major and what your strengths are. And I took the French exam and ended up studying French at the junior level. So French 301, you know, with a native speaker of French, 8:30 in the morning, my first college class. So that was intense. But, you know, I decided to major in French. I spent a year in Avignon while I was there, and fell in love, you know, with the culture. And so that's why you'll see that Provence, actually, of course, I mentioned that I'm going to be writing some contemporary fiction set in Provence because it is, you know, such an impactful place for me, and I want to revisit it in my fiction. Provence actually comes back in Daughters of the Night Sky in the epilogue, or the final chapters. And so it's a place that, you know, became very, very important to me. And I went to graduate school at Indiana University after a stint in Bayeux. Actually, I taught English for a year through the Fulbright Association. And taught English at a high school in Bayeux, which was a lovely experience as well. And you know, it's very, very different from Provence. It's amazing. A place that's, you know, twice the size of the state of Colorado, which is where I live, has such diversity. I mean, Colorado's a pretty diverse place, but if you think about it, it's just culturally so diverse. And let alone, you know, in its natural landscapes and everything, so incredibly diverse. And then so I started my master's degree at Indiana University, which is where I took a Canadian Civ class and learned about the Fille du Roi. I happened to also be taking a creative writing class at the time. And the best thing about creative writing classes is that they teach you to write on a deadline, and they teach you to look for ideas when you don't have any. And so my wonderful professor, Julie Augier, was lecturing about the founding of Canada, and she mentioned the Filles du Roi, who were the women, 770 of them, give or take, who were sent as mail order brides, for lack of a better term, they were shipped over with a dowry and a few household goods, in order to help set up housekeeping, and they were under the expectation that they would marry settlers, because you had a overabundance of men without female partners, and so they weren't making new French Canadians, and a lot of times they realized that farming in Canada is rough, because and the land hasn't been cleared, very short growing season, and growing, I mean, to clear land in Quebec is like waging war against the land. It's backbreaking. And so these women were encouraged to go and encouraged to help these men homestead, and because they were either becoming fur trappers and running off, and but they wanted the men tied to the land emotionally. They wanted their livelihoods tied to the land, so that if the British or the Native Americans were to attack, they would defend it. Because if they were fur trappers and just off in the woods, they wouldn't have cared what, if the British took over, the X, Y, or Z plot of land necessarily. And so it was all about making Quebec a defensible colony. And I thought, the premise of these women giving up everything they knew, and this is, these were women of usually pretty modest backgrounds, often who had at least orphaned, their fathers had often passed away, sometimes both parents. And this was their opportunity to be married. It wasn't an optional thing back then. It was either that or enter a nunnery, which wasn't free. And so I thought it was fascinating, and I'm like, this is a plot for a novel. And so I wrote it as a short story, what would eventually become the first chapter, as for my creative writing class. And after that, I of course, I finished that section of graduate school and went back later and actually wrote about the Fille du Roi for my master's thesis, in a more of an academic sort of way. But that story kind of festered. And so I got this amazing research grant through the Association Internationale des Études Québécoises. And so I was able to live in Quebec for a number of months and to do research for my thesis, which became a very ambitious master's thesis. And I squirreled away research for my book, because I knew that was really what I wanted to do, was to write the novel. And so once I finished my master's and my children were born and I regained some sense of normalcy in my life, I started writing, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Oh, that is really a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing that creative journey of that idea from your creative writing class through to published novel.
Yeah, it's been quite an adventure. To go from that process.
And I do have to say, I read your first novel first. It really is riveting.
Thank you.
And in terms of certainly its Quebecois background, but also in terms of the real human issues that you just alluded to. Now, I guess you kind of answered my second question, because you talked about the research for your two first books. But now, just as you have moved forward to contemporary fiction, would you like to talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on the role and status of French language and Francophone culture here in North America now? Or is there something else? I think I might have interrupted you.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say that, I spent, for the first two books, I basically, like I said, I kind of ferreted away research that I'm like, well, this wasn't going to fit in my academic thesis, but it could definitely be, the daily life things, like the items they used, how they got food, all that stuff, were things that I was able to ferret away. And I did my research at the University in Laval in Quebec, and a bit at McGill. But Laval is wonderful. That just spending time in that library, and I was in contact with Yves Landry, who is basically the world's leading researcher on the Fille du Roi. He was amazing. He's amazing. He wrote what we refer to as the Bible about Les Filles du Roi, which is I can't remember the title of it. I've got a copy that's falling apart over in my nonfiction shelf over here. But so that was basically the premise, was just a lot of time at Laval, and gathering resources that you just couldn't find here in the States. But
No,
yeah, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm so happy to hear you mention Université Laval. I too spent many happy hours, probably earlier in time than yours, in the library at Laval. And it was just a wonderful institution, world-class professors, world-class education, world-class academic support and resources. But please continue.
Oh yes, and in retrospect, if that's one thing I could change, it'd be possibly going to get my master's degree there. But I actually completed my master's degree 10 years after I started it. Believe it or not,
Wow.
I went to the University of North Texas, and that's where I got all the support to write my wonderful, the wonderful support to write my thesis. Marie-Christine Coupe was my advisor, and she is definitely an amazing human being, and it was wonderful to work with her for sure. Yes, and she's been very active in the AATF as well. And yeah, so to answer your question about the state of French language here and now, I taught French for a decade. I taught in 3 different public schools. And I taught online before it was cool. I actually taught for a number for 2. It kind of evolved because the school I was working for, which was a private school, got purchased, and so kind of in a number of different settings. But and the curriculum was formed by Middlebury, so it was solid curriculum. It was great. So I had the opportunity to teach in a lot of different backgrounds. My first school where I taught was lower income, struggling students without a lot of community support, all the way. And then my second school was a lot of military kids near Fort Carson. And the third in-person school was up in the northern part of Colorado Springs, where it was more affluent kids, the children of doctors and lawyers. And there's a huge difference in the importance. And it was also an IB school. That last school where I taught was an IB school, International Baccalaureate, and it was definitely a range of experience, and the amount of importance placed on foreign language education definitely was higher in the more affluent areas. And I think that that's a shame, because I think that we need to teach all students need to have the opportunity to learn foreign language from a young age, because we know
Absolutely.
that foreign language acquisition up until the age of 6 is incredible. And so we need to be teaching students foreign languages in kindergarten. And we need to have that sort of support. And we have such an emphasis in education on teaching to our standardized tests to show that our kids are able to read and write and do arithmetic, that we lose sight of their cognitive abilities. And I think that that is a terrible shame, and we lose the opportunity. And I understand that here in the United States, we are fairly isolated from a lot of the rest of the world, and it's easy to think that we are an island in a lot of respects. But we have our French Canadian neighbors to the north, we have our Spanish speaking neighbors to the south, and aside from that, we have pockets of Francophones all over the country. And there are a number of areas where that number is not insignificant. And so I do feel like, unfortunately, I don't feel like the emphasis on foreign language education is where it should be. I think that taking a more European approach to understanding that, we've got neighbors right next door that speak another language. And I think that the overemphasis on Spanish is unfortunate as well. I mean, Spanish is a wonderful language. I've studied it as well to a lesser degree. And it's very important, but you have a lot of business opportunities. French is the second language of a lot of people, and it's a way to communicate. And a lot of French folks, even though they've had years and years of English education, if you do business with them, making the effort to speak to them in their language goes a long way.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of times, especially, I noticed that when I was teaching in a French high school, that my older colleagues did not like speaking in English. They just didn't feel like they could do it justice. They were far more comfortable speaking in French. And so allowing somebody to speak in their own native language to you is going to allow you to understand that person better. And so I think that the importance of foreign language in our school system is something that really does need to be addressed. And it's something that I hope will gain in importance as, because we're becoming a more and more global culture. And yes, English is becoming the language of the global citizenry. But that doesn't mean to me, I think it's tragic to think of what will be lost if we don't preserve these foreign languages, and to kind of support them, and to translate more works of French into English, to expose people to the literature of France and other Francophone countries. I think it's definitely some opportunities being lost for us as a society.
Those are really all great points. I agree with you wholeheartedly on the importance of an early start to language learning. And I agree, it's something we owe to our children. And I like the fact that you mentioned translation. I think it's probably unrealistic to expect that everyone will learn to read other languages. But another way to bring those ideas, to bring new ways of thinking and seeing the world into our lives, is also through translation. And I think sometimes translators are not valued and possibly sought after to the extent that they should be. But that would also be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, because I think that one of the hardest things about being a writer is giving yourself permission to write. And so my interim between finishing my master's degree and starting to write Promise to the Crown in earnest, because there was a draft of the short story that sat in a drawer for 10 years. But I wanted to translate. There was a wonderful French Canadian book about the Fille du Roi called Marie Major by the wonderful Sergine Desjardins. And I worked on translating about 100 pages of that book and tried to get it in front of editors. And it is hard. And let me tell you, publishing your own work is difficult. Any writer will tell you that the process to publication is a long and rocky road to success. I mean, the fact that I'm actually able to earn a living writing books is, I'm incredibly fortunate. But translating was 10 times harder. And a lot of the presses that publish works in translation are very small niche presses. You're not going to see a lot of money from it, but they have to invest the money in acquiring the rights, which is not cheap, in order to do it. And I'm actually a licensed an official translator with Amazon Crossing, which reserving my thoughts on. Yeah, reserving my thoughts on Amazon as a corporation, because I have worked for them. And I mean, obviously 50% of all books in this country are sold through Amazon. One of the imprints of Amazon Publishing, and this is not just their self-publishing house, this is their actual publishing house that they have. Amazon Crossing is exclusively for works in translation. And they very rarely have French projects come through. And when they have come through, I haven't had time to actually throw my hat in the ring, because I'm working on my own stuff now. It's a lot more lucrative. But at least, I think they're fighting the good fight. I mean, they're translating works from, it's actually French and German and the other big languages are actually less. They're translating works from actually more obscure languages, which I think is fantastic. And I'd love to see more of that. But I think part of the problem is that you have a glut of talented writers that are all fit for print, more than they could ever possibly publish. And they don't have to go to the added expense of paying for the rights to be able to translate those books. And, I personally, with my own works, my first 2 books haven't been translated into any foreign languages yet. And unfortunately, but for Daughters of the Night Sky, Girls on the Line, or Across the Winding River, they've each had one translation, a Hungarian, Dutch, and you can see the Dutch copy of Girls on the Line right there.
How wonderful. How thrilling for you.
Yeah, and Czech is in the works for Across the Winding River. And it's given the audience that those books have, that they only got one foreign translation each, shows you how few books actually get translated, because it's an expensive process.
Those are really very valid, very interesting points, and probably relatively not on our radar in our daily conversations about languages. So, thank you for bringing those up. And, you know, one thing I have to admit, first and foremost, I'm a parent. I have three grown sons, and
Mhm,
I'm always interested in bilingualism, French or generally
mhm,
other languages, but that phenomenon of bilingualism and the use of additional languages in the home, in the family.
mhm,
And I'm wondering, with your background, and it's such an eclectic background, you know, a U.S. education, teaching in the U.S., online, in
mhm.
France, and also your thoughts on, of course, writing your own and on translation. Um, what would your thoughts be about maybe increasing the use of, and we'll use as our example, of course, French, in the home and in our local communities?
I think it's a great idea. You know, and my plan had been, you know, to speak exclusively in French to my children to give them that gift. And my kids actually have a little French library. You know, they've got Le Petit Prince and Madeleine and all the classics, Le Petit Nicolas, all those wonderful books. And unfortunately, my oldest son, not unfortunately, it is what it is. He's a gift of a child, but he is on the autism spectrum, and language is not his forte. He did not speak until he was 4,
Oh, wow.
and he's also, you know, doubly exceptional in that he's also dyslexic. And so reading is definitely our
Yeah.
challenge. And he's 10 years old and he is an amazing child. But language and foreign language is probably never going to be in his bailiwick. And so, but the cool thing is, yeah, their stepfather and I do both speak French. My husband, he doesn't speak, you know, he didn't major in French. He's a historian. It's a great match. He's a historian of the American West and others, and a historian of science. But he did study a lot of French because it's an important academic language, and that was the language he chose as an academic over Spanish or German or the other options he had. And he took some French and Latin, which is the two languages I probably study the most as well, along with some German and Spanish. And so we do speak in French in front of the kids on occasion to try and get them used to it. But that's, you know, a new phenomenon. But I think one of the best things I would love to see happen, because I know we have an Alliance Française down in Denver. I would love to see them do more outreach programs to students and have an active presence in the schools, and to get the kids excited about learning foreign languages. Because, and I think that is something that we've lost since the 1980s, is worrying about getting kids excited. Because, you know, you had in the 60s and 70s the advent of things like Sesame Street that got kids excited about learning. And then in the 80s, you had the birth of Reading Rainbow, which got kids excited about reading. And we need a French equivalent to that, because, and we've lost that. LeVar Burton will tell you this. I'm a huge LeVar Burton fan. And I mean, he was such an influence on my childhood because I was reading before I even hit school. And so to have, you know, to be parenting two struggling readers is a challenge for me. I'm trying to understand that. But we had these programs to get kids excited about things. But now we're worried about phonics. We're worried about the structural skills, and we're worried about STEM and all these buzzwords. And yes, science education in this day and age is paramount for certain. But if you want kids to get excited about, if you want kids to excel in reading, excel in science, and excel in the foreign languages, you have to get their buy-in first. That is absolutely
Yeah.
key. And so I think that, you know, if we wanted to have a renaissance of foreign language education in this country, it's got to come through organizations like the Alliance Française in all of our towns, and get kids excited, have programs in the schools, and not just cultural events, get them excited about the language itself, and finding ways to make it relevant and to convince their parents that it's relevant. Because my goodness, that is an important thing. Because I know so many parents that were, you know, when I was a teacher, and we'd have parent teacher conferences, and their parents would come in and they'd be, you know, gruffing up, says like, well, I wanted my kid to take Spanish, but it was full, so he's with you in French. And I'm like,
Oh,
well, I'm sorry, but your kid is having a good time because I'm fun. So, you know, and you know, that's one thing I do miss about the classroom is the song and dance. You know, I think, you know, it's, you know, a good foreign language teacher is worth their weight in gold. and encouraging more people to go into teaching foreign language, and good strong people that have encouraging all foreign language majors that want to teach to take a few classes in theater, ham it up, because that's what's going to get kids excited. And of course, there's the academic argument, well, intrinsic motivation, they should want to do it for the sake of the thing itself. But that's just not the way the world works. We need to get people excited and meet people where they
are. Those are such wise words, and I can tell they're spoken, even though I know you said you've transitioned to full-time your life as a writer and an artist, but nonetheless, I can tell those words spoken by someone with the vocation to teach.
I miss it. Yeah, I do miss it terribly.
That element of getting the learner, no matter who the learner is, what age they are, or what their motivation may be, but getting them excited about the language. So truly important. Aimie Runyan, are there any other thoughts you'd like to share with us?
No, to everybody listening, I know that these are all things that you've probably thought about a lot, and it's a subject that you're all passionate about. So I hope that, maybe you can go out and reach out to your Alliance Française and encourage them to create outreach programs to local schools, because I think that is a piece that has been missing, and it's the most valuable thing the Alliance Française can do. It's not just about appealing to the adult learner who wants to learn French because they want to go to France or whatever. It's about appealing to students while they're young, and encouraging them to continue on past the basic level. And I appreciate everybody for listening. I hope you decide to check out my books. And
absolutely,
yeah. And it has been a pleasure to be here, and I'm honored that you asked me to come, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Aimie Runyan. I'm going to stop the recording now, but I want to thank you once again and recommend most highly. And I confess, I've only read your first two, the two set in Quebec. And that was how really you came to my attention. I was looking for something to read for, as you put it, a vacation, but something that was near to my heart, as Quebec is. And I look forward to reading all these other great stories that you are telling. And I encourage you to keep writing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us today. À la prochaine.
À la prochaine. Au revoir.